What we're going to talk about this morning is this whole concept of central sensitization and kind of detail out what we now know happens to the body after it's been exposed to unpleasant sensations or injuries and so forth. A quick background, a little bit of an overview. Pain rehab programs, as some of you have heard me say, have been present for 40 years now. This is not a new concept of what we're practicing and what we're doing. And the principles of pain rehab have really remained relatively unchanged over that time. Three main goals of rehab: physical restoration, trying to help the person regain as much physical functioning as possible; reduction and elimination of strong medicines, pain medicines, sleeping pills, etc. And then addressing the emotional components of pain, depression, anger, stress, anxiety, to help the person function in a more balanced sort of way. Now, what has also happened, though, more recently is that there has been a more lucid, clearly laid out understanding from the body perspective what actually causes chronic pain and chronic symptoms. And we're going to lay that out this morning. What we try to do every Friday is we try to give you sort of the highlights of the week, and every week we have sort of one main topic. So this week is central sensitization, week 2 is cycle of pain, and week 3 is pain behaviors, all sort of core principles of pain rehab. So this morning I want to talk about the cycle of, or the sensitization, and then also go over some of the behavioral principles we talked about this week, just to kind of draw out some of the other things that we feel like are important. So to start with, as we do every week, I just want to focus our attention back on the central nervous system. I know that Australian person's a lot better than I am, but they're just another pretty hand. I actually know what I'm talking about. Chronic pain and chronic symptoms begin, the problem, if you will, or the process, if you will, begins in the periphery, okay? And the periphery is really our nervous system outside of the brain and spinal cord. Every square inch of our body, we have sensors. We have sensors that tell us information about temperature, movement, vibration, pain, pressure. Anything that you can sense in your body, we have a sensor for. They're nerve endings, they're special nerve receptors. That's in our gut, our bones, our joints, our blood vessel system, our nervous system. Everything but hair and fingernails basically have these sensors. So this peripheral input can include bones, joints, muscles, skin, nerves, the vascular system, the gut. And what happens in central sensitization is that this peripheral input is upregulated, okay? Now, we have all had the experience of upregulation on a short-term basis, but the upregulation that we talk about with central sensitization is actually a permanent upregulation of the sensitivity of the receptors, okay? We talked this week about if I were to walk down to one of you, if I walk down to Kevin and I start tapping him on the shoulder over and over and over again, not hard, not doing any tissue damage, not bruising him, after 100 or 200 taps, he'd be like, "Stop, leave me alone, that's bothering me." And all I would have done is temporarily upregulated a very small portion of his skin with a repetitive pressure sensation, okay? We've all had that same experience in other aspects. If you have been in a very warm environment temporarily and you move to a cold one, it feels extra cold, okay? So our body has that ability to temporarily change its response. But what happens with chronic pain and chronic symptoms and central sensitization is this input has been significant enough, okay, and the input can come from injury, illness, disease, repetition, surgery, or it could have been lifelong. Some of our patients can't remember a time when they didn't have headaches or didn't have gut problems. Their mom said, they were always a fussy baby and had, a sensitive stomach. So sometimes we just bring this to the table. Most of the time it's acquired in one way or another, and usually it's some combination of all these factors, okay? So these factors affect these systems that lead to peripheral upregulation. So your peripheral nervous system is permanently changed. They're living cells. The more they do their job, the stronger they are at doing their job. They chemically and physically change the strength of the signal. Part 2. As that signal goes to the brain repetitively and through the spinal cord, the receiving part in the brain that receives all sensory input is called the somatosensory cortex. That gets sensitized, okay? So in very simple terms, what ends up happening with chronic pain and other chronic symptoms is you get a louder message coming from the body and a more sensitive receiver in the brain. Now, let me pause for a second, because if you're new to this program or you haven't heard parts of this lecture before, absolutely none of what I have just said is in anyone's individual control, okay? When I say sensitized, I don't mean that you're sensitive, okay? Like a delicate little hothouse flower. Oh, he's so sensitive. That's not what we're talking about. Your brain, when we talk about sensitization, your brain has literally changed the threshold, lowered, to perceive sensations. And when you receive more sensations, it's more likely than not to be perceived as noxious, uncomfortable, painful, irritating, negative. Okay, that's what we're talking about. And this process has nothing to do with how smart, old, dumb, active, whatever. This has nothing to do with any personal characteristics. And I make a big point of that, and I try to make a big point in the program, because our patients come to us, they're all special to us, they really are, but they're not unique. There's nothing about our patients that are any different from anybody else walking this planet, except for they ran into some blender of this combination that led their systems to be upregulated, okay? So family members, if you're hearing this for the first time, your loved one is not neurotic, they're not have a low pain tolerance, they're not being a baby, they're not making this up. This is a physical change that they had very little control over. Do things like stress, life events, other health issues affect this? Sure. They can all lower the threshold, make the system more vulnerable. But at the end of the day, this process is not in anyone's control. The second point I want to make about this is we don't know exactly when this happens. Most of you can identify when your pain started, or when the problem started, or when you had your first surgery. But no one can identify when this problem became chronic, because it's a process over time that gradually changes more and more, okay? So most everyone in the program can say when they think their pain started, but nobody can say when it became chronic. I've seen patients where I truly believe their pain is chronic after a month or two. I've had other patients that dealt with it for years, and then it finally sort of led into this sensitization, okay? So that's point number one. The starting point can be very vague, hard to track down. It's also a reason that we tell our patients and families to stop trying to sort out what caused this, okay? Because seeking the cure, trying to undo the knot, trying to figure out why this happened, only engages us in more of a quest, and that quest keeps us more enveloped in our problem. And the more enveloped we are in our problem, the more we think about it, the more we dwell on it, the worse our problem is going to be, okay? Secondly, as this sensitized cortex progresses, we not only have symptoms of pain, we can begin to have problems with fatigue, numbness, sensitivity to sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, movement. And so now a problem that started out as, wow, I really sprained my ankle, becomes a problem that leads to, man, I can't tolerate certain foods anymore, and the lights are too bright, and I can tell when the weather is changing, and don't touch me because it hurts my skin. And so you get this problem that begins to spread. And when you enter that phase, that's where a lot of confusion comes in, because that looks kind of funky, doesn't it? Really, I can't touch you on your skin, but there's nothing wrong with your skin. I know, but it just bothers me. And I can tell that a storm front's coming through. Really? But it's true. And what happens in this phase is both the person that's struggling with this, their family, and the medical system begin to head off in all these different directions, trying to fix these as if they were individual problems. So we'll talk more next week with the cycle of pain, but if you begin to pursue each one of these individually, where do you end up? In the world of the specialists. Because now I can't tolerate certain foods, so I'm going to have to go to a gastroenterologist and possibly an allergist. I'm not sleeping well and I don't want to move, so I'm going to and I have numbness and tingling, so I'm going to go to the neurologist. My muscles and joints ache, so I'm going to go to a rheumatologist, right? And pretty soon I get split into my subparts, and it's missing the picture. This truly is missing the forest for the trees. And the modern medical system wants to break down and specialize, and I'm all for that because there's a lot to be gained by that. But once this process hits, it becomes a self-defeating process. It becomes something that actually hurts the person more than it helps them. Okay? Now, related to all of this, once the process has started, so if I can, I'm going to put up here primary. This is the primary process. The secondary process are the things that can maintain some of these difficulties. Stress and emotional distress, chemicals, behavior, physical deconditioning. So after the fact, our response to all these symptoms starts to become inadvertently feeding into the system, okay? So now I don't know why I have these sensations. Nobody can seem to help me. In fact, some of my doctors are telling me they think it's in my head. I'm not able to go to work. My family's treating me differently. I'm not able to live up to my type A perfectionistic control freakiness standards. And so I'm a failure. My self-esteem goes down the toilet. I become guilty. I get more irritable and angry. I have harder interpersonal relationships. And so my emotional distress not only affects my interaction with my world, but it literally feeds back and changes how my brain is responding. So my sensations get worse, my mood centers get worse, and so I become to have more emotional distress. And usually when we have more emotional distress, we don't function as well. We're more distracted, we're more irritable, and we tend to push people away. And like we talked about this week, what's a core desire when you feel distressed? To have comfort and control, right? So I feel distressed, I feel physically and emotionally unsettled. I want to have comfort and control. Well, what do I know I can control? Well, I can control what I do. So if I do less and protect myself more and stay home more and take more medicines and don't go out so I don't have to interact with the world, I'm protected. But what happens to my sensitization levels the more I try to protect myself? They go up. Sit in a dark room for 20 minutes and flick on the lights. What happens? You blink and say, ooh. And that's nothing. Some of you have done this for months and years, where you've stopped doing things, and then the minute you feel a little bit better, and this is where it bleeds into the behavior, you go crazy again, and you push, and you try to make your world right again, because nobody does it as good as you do it, we know that. And then once you get everything back organized, you crash again. And then when you crash again, you see what all the other idiots are doing out there, they're not doing it right, and you get more stressed out, or you know what you should do. And then one helpful relative comes by and goes, but you look so good. Okay? So the stress increases because the inside doesn't match the outside. And the "looks so good" comment really makes you feel inadequate, because that kind of implies that if you really wanted to do it, you could do it. You're just not trying hard enough. And so the minute you feel better again, you go and do it all over. Okay? Feeding into that. Oh, my doctor found this medicine that really helps. Okay? It's called tramadol. It's non-addicting. It's kind of hard to come off of, ask a few people, but it helps me get my vacuuming done. And then we up the ante and we take a little bit more because we've got more stuff to do. And then the doctor gives me something to go to sleep at night, and that helps me get a little bit better sleep. But it really doesn't. It just knocks you out. So you get into this chemical morass, this soup of polypharmacy. Your brain's all confused. Your behavior's all confused. It makes you push and crash even more. It makes you think even less. Now you're confused and you can't carry on a conversation, so your family treats you like you're an idiot, and you withdraw even more. And we'll talk next week about this, but then the backside of this is your doctor says, look, you're having trouble staying awake during the day. We'll give you a stimulant to keep you going, okay? And we're right back to Jefferson Airplane, go ask Alice. You know, one pill makes you smaller, one pill makes you tall, right? Up, down, up, down, up, down. So the chemicals mess you up. Plus, we have very good evidence that some of the pain medicines literally make the pain signal stronger. There's a paradoxical effect that one part of the brain turns down the sensory awareness, another part of the brain actually amps it up. So now part of the thing that helped you a little bit, at least it took the edge off, is now making your pain worse. And you have all the side effects of it. Physical deconditioning. Huge, huge problem in this program. And physical deconditioning isn't just about not exercising enough and getting out of shape. It's also about voiding activity, because when you did it in the past, it hurt. So the more you see all these factors start to work together, you've got the original problem that doesn't go away. You've got all that reaction over there that needs attention, and you have more distress and more symptoms. And then you get all these secondary problems that further feed into the cycle. Okay? Does that make sense to you guys? All right, well, have a nice day. We're done. So what do we do about this? This is really why pain rehab works so good. Because if you embrace this, if you really embrace the concepts of the program, especially those secondary things, we can't control what happened to you in the first place. Nobody can. We can't go back and turn back the clock. And there's no medical miracle out there that's going to turn the switch off. I don't care what website you're on. But if you start to control the things you can control, moderate levels of activity and exercise, dealing with emotional distress, trying to get a better night's sleep, doing it with less chemicals, enhancing your social support network, those are the things that ultimately are going to turn down sensitization. Now I want to be very clear about one other thing, and then I'm going to go into a couple different models that we have. Sensitization, we believe, is a permanent change in your nervous system, okay? And people get really bummed out when we say that. So there's no cure, okay? There is no cure. There is no cure. This is about management, not cure. Once you embrace that fact, your whole world gets a ton better, okay? Because you guys have been wearing yourself out seeking the cure. You've been wearing out your insurance company, you've been wearing out your family, you've been wearing out the internet, trying to find that one thing that will put all the pieces together like you're some CSI investigator, okay? It's not out there. It's an elusive snipe hunt, okay? The other thing to remember about central sensitization is when we stop trying to directly deal with it and we deal with some of the secondary effects, a lot of the symptoms do calm down. But it's kind of like trying to get to sleep at night. Remember when you were little and it was the eve of your birthday and your mom said, well, the sooner you get to sleep, the sooner it's going to be your birthday. And you went, you can't force yourself to sleep. You can't force these symptoms to go down. But if you begin to behave differently and react differently and detoxify and get in better shape, the symptoms will indirectly become less. That's a hard concept because we want to have a direct approach. If I just do this, my symptoms will be better. That's not the case. If you engage in the process of the program, the symptoms will be less impactful. The third comment about sensitization. Think about this process and how you feel and what you think you should do or what your family thinks you should do, like having a broken sensor in your brain. Your sensors right now are inaccurate, they're overreactive, and they're telling you the wrong message. Okay, I guess that's inaccurate, only said differently. But anyway, the point is, you can't trust how you feel. That should not be the dictator of what you're doing. What we do in pain rehab is, and I know we're pushy, bossy, and very rigid, but we take over for 3 weeks, okay? We take over the wheel because you guys don't know how to drive right now. But by following the principles of the program, and some of you maybe never knew how to drive, but that's a different lecture. Following the principles of the program, you can learn strategies that will be effective in the long run. The structure of the program replaces how you feel. But that's a hard shift to make because we all come to the table thinking how I feel is what's accurate. It's not an accurate signal right now. How you feel is highly inaccurate. You have to go by what the plan is. I've used this description before, but it's very much like a pilot learning to fly by instruments and not visually. When a pilot learns to fly by instruments, they can navigate through many different weather situations that they couldn't when they were only relying on their visual sight of the ground. But what's hard about flying by the instruments is sometimes what you feel is different than what the instrument's telling you to do. In fact, I'm not a pilot, but I've had pilots tell me one of the hardest things they did when they got instrument rated was to trust the fact, because when the instrument said you're going down, they felt like they were going up. Or when they felt like they were turning left, the instrument said you're turning right. So you have to go right now by the instruments because how you feel is going to lead you in the wrong way. Once you get instrument rated, then you're going to get a better sense of where your plane is going. But right now you have to trust what seems very unnatural. It feels unnatural, you guys, to get out and do things when you don't feel like it. It feels unnatural to give up pain behaviors because at least they helped a little bit. It feels unnatural to stop the quest for what's wrong with you, to stop talking about it, to stop focusing on it. But if you engage in those things, it's going to help you greatly down the road. Now I want to talk about two things that are also important principles of this program. We talk about this model, we call it the ABC versions, of our patients and what they've gone through coming into this program. The majority, 99+% of our patients, before their pain got so bad or before their symptoms got so bad, were really very active people. And so in the A version, we talk about being active, physically fit, happy, being that go-to person, being social, productive. In a lot of ways, a lot of what goes into being a type A person, right? Motivated, goal-oriented, achievement, get things done, people relied on you, work hard, play hard. This is an okay state to be in, okay? And it's one of the reasons, I'll clarify for some of the newer folks, it's one of the reasons we lovingly call you type A perfectionistic control freaks, okay? Because before all this hit, that worked okay for you. And a lot of folks that get to this program have a lot of these tendencies. Also to clarify, it's not the type A-ness that had your problems, because there are plenty of type B persons with the same problems, but they're cracking a Corona right now, taking a Lortab and waiting for Oprah to come on TV. They're content with a life of low productivity. That drove you guys crazy, okay? So this is where you were. As the pain set in, and central sensitization or chronic pain, however you want to formulate it, became more prominent, things like depression, deconditioning, distress, drugs, discouragement came into the picture. And so when you came to the Mayo Clinic or you came into this program, many of you would rightly say, you know what, my life is not where I want it to be. My mood is down, my sleep is poor, my social relations are off, I can't work, I can't do the things I want to do. I need help, okay? What we so often hear, though, just to highlight this, is that in this process, both patients and families will say, I just want my old life back, or my old wife, or my old son, or my old father, whatever it is. And we have to be very frank with you guys. That's not going to happen, okay? I hope you're starting to get the understanding. The reason it's not going to happen is because there have been permanent changes that are not reversible. Plus, for some of you, it's been quite a while, okay? If it's been several years, there's no old life. You're not 20 anymore, right? So there's a combination here, but to call this out for what it is really starts to help shift our focus. Because if we keep, and family members, if you keep pushing and striving to have that person be back like nothing ever happened, you're not helping. And folks in the program, if that's your main goal, you're going to keep beating your head against the wall and you're going to be frustrated, okay? Now, I'll hasten to add, wish I could write this bigger, but none of you were as awesome as you thought you were anyway, okay? So get over yourselves. Glory days, right? Oh, yeah. Except for, yeah, exactly. Now, after the program, or as you're leaving, what we're thinking and what we're aiming for is that by the time you get done with the program, you will have regained some parts of this, but it will be modified. Your mood will improve, your sleep will improve, your physical fitness will improve, your productivity will improve. But it will be with a huge modification so that you're not pushing and crashing all the time. You leave with a schedule so that you know what you can do day in and day out, so you can do things day in and day out. Your families will start to trust you more because they'll see your consistency, not your productivity. And I also think, and we've talked about this before, when you embrace these concepts and you're able to make the progress and find the improvement, you become a more stable person, and in many ways you have a better perspective than folks out there that never have to think about this stuff. There are plenty of fools out there that are work hard, play hard, they push all week and they party all weekend, and they can get by with it for decades. But when you've learned, I have to modify, but I can still be productive and enjoy life and have a good quality of life, I think you've really found something that a lot of people don't have. Sustainability and balance. Because those folks that are out there working hard, playing hard, they're also probably heavily into their chemicals. They have other issues. They're missing a lot of things that you guys have found. Okay? Now, I'm not saying it's really awesome to have chronic pain, and aren't you lucky that you got it? But I am saying that C version is really decent. So spend a little time mourning the A. We'll talk about grief next week. Spend a little time thinking about what's past, but really focus towards the future, because it's a heck of a lot better than you were when you got here. Okay? So family members, if you hear us talk about the ABC version, this is the model we're talking about. Okay? Last thing I want to talk about. And this is true for anxiety, pain, and other things. It is our behavioral approach and why behaviorism is such an important part of this program. So yes, we can help you get in better shape. We can help you come off of medicines. We can address some of the physiology, which is important. But if we don't change some of the behaviors associated with that, we're fighting an uphill battle. That's why this is not a detox physical therapy program, okay? We need to also change our behavioral approach to things. And we talked this week about the fact that as humans, we're subject to many different behavioral influences. Classical conditioning, Pavlov's dog, if you remember, the pairing of a stimulus and a response that can change our reaction to things. So we talked about pain behaviors falling into that category. I hurt, therefore I grab my arm. Well, now every time I grab my arm, I hope you're beginning to understand, I'm also stimulating my brain centers that make my symptoms worse. So it used to be a reflexive behavior in response to pain, now actually inadvertently feeds the pain cycle. Okay? More importantly, or more elegantly, operant conditioning, that is, reward, begins to feed into the system. Okay? Humans are geared towards seeking reward. We do things for reward. So you work for a paycheck. Someone smiles at you and you smile back. You do things so that you can get a reward and feel better. Well, there are two principles with operant conditioning that we talk about. Positive and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is getting something by doing something, getting something good. So you pull on the slot machine handle and you get the jackpot. You work and get a paycheck. You walk up to a friend and they smile at you and say, it's good to see you. Okay, those are all rewarding mechanisms in our environment. Negative reinforcement is the reduction or elimination of a negative experience. Okay, so you do something and it stops something bad. This week we used the example of a temper tantrum child in a grocery store. Okay, so the setup is like this. You go to the grocery store at 4:30 in the afternoon with your kid. You mistakenly go by the bakery aisle, and there's free cookies, and your child says, I want a cookie. And you carefully explain the nutritional constraints that you're under because it's almost supper time, and it's not a good time for cookies. And your 4, 5, 12-year-old child, however old they are, they don't care. They want a cookie. And so what do they begin to do? I want a cookie, I want a cookie, I want a cookie, give me a cookie. They start, having a temper tantrum. Well, during that escalation of their temper tantrum behavior, they cross some line of your discomfort, okay? People are starting to look. Nowadays, they're starting to get out their smartphones. They're taking footage for DCFS, right? You start to sweat. The bakery person's like, really, just give them a cookie. The manager comes around the corner. So you're in a conundrum, right? Now, all the good parenting books would say, obviously, don't give them a cookie. Smack them instead. No, I'm just kidding. But you're so desperate that you give the child a cookie, okay? So what you just did is you positively reinforced their temper tantrum. You rewarded their fit. But what did they do? They shut up. They negatively reinforced your cookie-giving behavior. Now I can finish my grocery shopping and get the heck out of here, right? Now, all the know-it-all parents in the room are thinking, I would never do that, that's terrible, that's stupid, because I'm only setting myself up for failure, because what's going to happen the next time we're in the grocery store? The kid has learned temper tantrum equals reward. And you've learned, if I give them a cookie, they'll at least shut up for the moment. So this pattern can get repetitive. It can get repeated over time. The problem is, the more it's repeated, the stronger it gets, the harder it gets to break. Now, what if we're diligent about our parenting and we say, we're done with this, we're going to stop this once and for all. So you go into the grocery store and you say, no cookie, and you're going to just let the temper tantrum fade. That's awesome, that's a really good idea, but the problem is, you better have worn your Kevlar panties because it's going to get tough before it gets better. The kid's going to escalate their temper tantrum. Now, intellectually, we know it can't last forever, but it feels like forever. And here's the other danger. If I give in at any time during that temper tantrum, what did I just do? Cinch the behavior even more, because now the kid knows, oh, they have a limit, I can get to the limit and beat them. Now, the newer folks are thinking, this is a parenting class? The point is, we do the same thing with our anxiety and our pain. This same graph could be a panic attack. Whoa, here we go, panic, panic, panic. I got to get out of this, take a Xanax, whew, I feel better. Okay? Panic, 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 run out of the store, ooh, I feel better. Panic, 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 call my friend, ooh, I feel better. Any reaction we have to things like increased anxiety strengthen the pattern of the anxiety. So instead of a temper tantrum kid, our anxiety is like that bully that comes and says, hey, give me something. We give them something like a Xanax or breathing into a bag or running out of the store, and we temporarily feel better, but it's right there again to get us. If it's not panic, it can be pain. Ooh, bad pain day, it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad. I got to take something, I got to do something. Pain behavior, pain pill, escape, avoid, withdraw, ice, whatever. Boom, symptoms go down temporarily. But they're coming back because this is a permanent chronic situation. So our behaviors reinforce some of our sensations and our symptoms. Our core desire to feel better can work against us sometimes. So one of the other core principles of the program that you'll hear us talk about is riding the storm out, not responding. What we do on a difficult day, nothing. Time for PT, go to group, have a good lunch, we'll see you this afternoon. We don't whisk people off to a quiet, plush, leather-lined, incense-laden room till they can recover. Because if we did that response, they might feel better in the short run, but all we're doing is reinforcing their pain sensations, aren't we? So when we have you keep going through the day even though you don't feel great, we're actually helping you strengthen and break that behavioral pattern that's become so enmeshed. Because before you got here, you didn't know that that was a bad pattern. I'm just trying to feel better. I hope I feel better tomorrow so I can do stuff. But by breaking that pattern, you can see that doesn't have to last as long. I don't have to be subject to so much distress. And the more you do that, along with some of these other tools, the quicker the cycle gets broken. And the quicker you can get back on your feet and be active again. So, questions about any of this? I know I've covered quite a bit of territory, but to take home the message about the ABC version, there's modifications but improvement. Sensitization, permanent sensory changes that can be managed, not cured. And then the behavioral impact of giving into our symptoms and responding in a way to temporarily feel better in the long run can make us worse. Any questions about that? Now, as most of you know that have been in the group for a little bit, I can't talk or think without a pen in my hand, so you'll just have to excuse me. You also know that, as I confessed earlier this week, and it was International Left-Handers Day the other day, I'm a lefty, so I'm a terrible artist. But when we talk in our program about some of those very same issues that the video just talked about, this is a very crude representation of the brain and spinal cord after the poor individual met with a steamroller. What we're really talking about is some permanent changes in the peripheral input and the brain itself. So, a brief history of chronic pain rehab, just to bring everyone up to speed. Pain rehabilitation programs have been present for about 40 years now. Dealing with chronic pain is not necessarily a new phenomenon. And in fact, over the history of treating chronic pain, Mayo Clinic's had a program since 1974. There are others in the country. There have always been three main points of emphasis. The first point is physical restoration to the level possible. So many, if not all of our patients experience a decline in physical conditioning, physical capacity. Second is eliminating the use of strong medications. We'll come back to that one in a minute. And the third one is dealing with the emotional distress that's caused by the pain syndrome and helping the person renormalize some of their psychological functioning. Those goals have not changed virtually in the past 40 years. What has changed, and this is a rather new theory and phenomenon, is that in about 2006, 2007, there were some very important articles that came out drawing together what we'd observed clinically for a long time, and that is that persons with chronic pain may experience a variety of symptoms throughout their body, but the pattern is very similar. So some patients would come in with have numbness and tingling, and others have sharp shooting pains, and others have dull achy pains, and some people have headaches, and some people have gut pain, and some people have fibromyalgia. Some people have had 5 surgeries and have failed back syndrome. But we've been universally successful in treating all those different phenomena with a similar approach. We did a study back in the early 90s, mid-90s, where we looked at the epidemiology of chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and multiple chemical sensitivities in a primary care setting. And it turns out, even at that time, there was more than an 80% overlap in symptoms from what was then considered to be 3 distinct syndromes. Well, further studies have shown that what we now know happens, or we now think happens, is that there are specific neurologic changes that occur both in the periphery and the central nervous system. In the periphery, we all have sensors in every square inch of our body except for our hair and fingernails. And these sensors are detecting movement, vibration, pain, temperature, all sorts of things. And for most of us, that sensation, that sensory awareness is just a constant tape. We really don't pay much attention to it. But if things happen to increase this, we'll talk about the cycle of pain in a minute, but things like injury, illness, surgery, progressive diseases, a whole host of things that don't have time or the space to clarify now, but there's a wide mouth of things that can increase the peripheral input. And what happens is that over time, the more our peripheral neurons are stimulated, they actually physically change the strength of their impulse going into the central nervous system. So they send a stronger message into the body. This increased impulse goes up in specific parts of the brain, leads to sensitivity. So in short, you end up with a louder message from the body and a more sensitive receiver in the brain. Those are permanent changes that no one has control over. And when we talk about sensitivity, it's important for family members to hear this. We're not talking about that a person is sensitive like a shrinking violet. Okay, I can't take any pain. That's not it at all. In fact, our patients are some of the toughest folks around because they get up every day and endure stuff that many people can't even fathom. So it's not sensitivity like personal sensitivity. It's literally the sensory experience in the brain changes and becomes permanently sensitized. But what is also important to understand is that these changes are not just pain. It can be sensations of fatigue, sight, sound, smell, taste, movement, touch, and temperature, because those are all the processes that part of the brain detects. So what starts to look really bizarre and somewhat chaotic is that persons with chronic pain on the front end have increased input, but on the back end, all sorts of things start to change. So suddenly it hurts to be touched on the skin. People become sensitive to temperature changes. They start being intolerant to certain food types. They might get tired more easily. They might feel vibrations like riding in a car is harder than it used to be. So all of these sensory changes occur, okay? And if you're not aware of this phenomenon, what's the assumption? Right? My loved one suddenly became this big baby that can't tolerate anything anymore. Utterly false. Okay? What happened is those sensory inputs increase to the point that they become increasingly distressing. And what happens when we are uncomfortable? What do we want to do? You want relief. You want comfort. And what's the natural way to get comfort? Withdraw, stop the activity, don't do it. If it hurts, don't move. The lights are too bright, let's dim them down. The sounds are too loud, let's block them out. So then we start to live in a world that's more and more cushioned. But what happens to the sensitivity? It goes up. I mean, if we turn the lights off in this room for several minutes, just made the room pitch black, whether you have sensitization or not, when we turn the lights back on, everyone's going to blink and take a moment to adjust to the light change. So that's a normal human phenomenon. Now imagine doing that for weeks, months, and years, because you're either told to do that or it's your natural inclination to do that. And pretty soon this sensory nervous system is fighting several battles. Number one, you've still have the increased input, but you also have this whole range of symptoms that are sensitized. We're going to talk a little bit this morning about some specific aspects of this, but there are, in general, 3 or 4 things that make this worse. Emotional distress, our behavioral response, and chemicals. Stress, depression, anger, anxiety all feed our brain's sensory awareness and can amp up the sensations we experience and decrease our effective coping with it. Our behaviors, we'll talk on Monday about pain behaviors for those of you who haven't had that lecture. Our behaviors can directly impact our sensory awareness. And then the chemicals that we're given, the medications, the prescriptions that we're given can also make it worse. Okay? So this is our fundamental theory. It's called central sensitization. You hear a lot about it in the program, but the biologic underpinnings are really undeniable. And to me, I think it's important for families and patients to hear, this explains a lot of weirdness. This explains a lot of things that weren't very explainable before. Because the assumption is depression, it's in your head, you're neurotic, et cetera, and that's simply not the case. You may be neurotic, but that really had nothing to do with you getting this problem. You may be crazy, but that's not why you have chronic pain. But we fought this battle for decades because in medicine, in particular, and psychiatry certainly hasn't helped us, but in medicine, there's been a dichotomization. It's either psyche versus soma. If you can't measure it, touch it, feel it, quantify it, then it must be a psychological phenomenon, okay? And this kooky old guy that did cocaine, smoked cigars, and had a goatee didn't help us at all, Sigmund Freud, okay? And then there's this assumption that there's these deep intrapsychic conflicts that are causing all these problems. It's utter nonsense. It's much simpler than that, and a lot of it has to do with your body's reaction. Now, this week we talked about a very important concept that's been in pain rehab from its inception. Called the cycle of pain. I'm going to draw the first half and then talk about it for a second. So in our experience, persons that come to this program have a history of either injuries or surgeries or deterioration or some combination of that, or pain that they just grew up with, pain that always had headaches since they were a little kid. The origin isn't as important. But almost always, at some point near the beginning, we went to the doctor for help, okay? And in fact, the initial visits to the doctor, to the healthcare system, generally paid off. Even for you guys, some of you can think back when your problem first started, that first prescription, the first round of physical therapy, the suggestions to rest and ice it if it hurts, probably helped your symptoms a bit, okay? And in fact, we talk about the fact that really, for 90% of the healthcare population, that's where it ends. Break your arm, you go to the ER, they put a cast on, you take a few pain pills, you're good to go. Your appendix gets inflamed, the surgeon cuts it out, you're good to go. But if the pain is becoming chronic, either by disease progression or other factors that we talked about over here, and the symptoms return, often we will go back to doctor or doctors, and then what happens? So the first pass doesn't stick. Now what do we do? Or what do our doctors recommend? Yep, we get more medication, we can get injections, tests, surgery, TENS units, PT. We in essence enter the world of the specialists. For those of you old enough, I always imagine it's like a film noir, kind of a black and white ceiling fan rotating slowly, a guy in a fedora smoking a cigarette. Welcome to the world of the specialists. And you know it's not going to be a fun movie. So we enter over here, and you're sent to a ton of specialists because guess what happens with all these complaints? If you tingle or if you have certain neurologic symptoms, you're going to go to a neurologist. If you ache and have joint pain, you're going to go to the rheumatologist. If your skin itches, you're going to go to the dermatologist. If you can't bend over right, you're going to go to the PM&R doctor who's going to help you with exercises. And then you end up in a pain clinic, the surgeon's office, et cetera, right? So you get parsed out into your pieces based on your symptoms, and each set of specialists is going to do their specialty exams on you, okay? And we talked earlier this week, let's talk about some of the tests that are run these days, okay? EMGs, OMG, right? You take needles, stick them in muscles, sore muscles, and you turn on the electricity, okay? I mean, we can't even do that to prisoners of war, and yet we do it here in the hospital, okay? And you leave with more pain. You leave amped up. Now, it might be temporary, but guess what? You can't afford for this to keep happening. So tests can make it worse. We talked about the GI tests. First, there's the prep, okay? They make you go to the bathroom until you're just an empty vacuum. And then they put tubes where tubes should not go. And they take biopsies, and they make you swallow radioactive eggs. So if your gut's sensitive, what do you think that's going to do to your gut sensitivity? And we talked about MRIs. Pretty comfortable. Tempur-Pedic, quiet. You can move around as much as you want. They're short-lived. No. Hard bed, loud noise, hold really, really still so they get a good picture, and then lay there for 45 minutes. It's going to amp up your symptoms. So even some of the fundamental physical things we do to try to discern what's wrong can make the problem worse. Surgery. A lot of our patients have had multiple operations, revisions and removal of scar tissue and this and that. We have a saying in pain rehab, there's not a pain problem another surgery can't make worse. Because when you invade the body with scalpel and probe, you're going to leave behind, inevitably, some kind of consequence. And just to pause on surgery for a minute, we know that many surgeries are necessary for functional restoration or the health of the patient, but rarely, especially in our population, do we see surgeries do a lot to reduce symptoms, especially pain symptoms. But it gets to be this kind of cyclic thing where one problem begets another, and then the surgery can actually become making things worse. TENS units in physical therapy. We love our physical therapists, except for they never come, except for one person come, but they're out like on coffee break right now. But we love our physical therapists, but outpatient physical therapy is the worst thing you can do for chronic pain. Because what happens in outpatient physical therapy? You go 2 or 3 times a week for about an hour, they ask you what your pain is, then they put you through all sorts of exercises, then they give you ice at the end, and then they say, I'll see you on Tuesday. And between times, you feel so lousy that you go home and you don't do anything for 2 days, and by the time you're feeling better again, you have to have physical therapy again. Okay? Sound familiar? It's pushing and crashing. It's amping up the sensitization. And it's not a dig at outpatient physical therapy, but what they're best at is specific, isolated restoration of body parts, not an oversensitized nervous system. So you have a total knee or you have a shoulder surgery, yes, you need physical therapy. Strengthen those muscles, get your mobility back. But if you hurt all over or you hurt in a lot of parts of your body, it's an impossible task for them. And all they're doing is feeding the pushing and crashing cycle. Okay? Injections and medicines. One of the worst things about injections and medicines is that sometimes they work, and they also lead to pushing and crashing. So you get your spine injection on Thursday afternoon, you lay low on Friday, you feel great on Saturday, so you vacuum the house, rake the yard, clip the dog, have a party, and by Monday you feel crappy again. Oops, sorry, I mean not very good again. I always forget this is on tape. And then you push and you say, well, that injection didn't work. Well, the injection might have worked if you hadn't overdone it all weekend. Spinal cord stimulators, we mentioned this a little bit the other day. You try to block a pain signal with electricity and it works for a while, just like TENS units can work for a while. But you are applying a static solution to an organic, dynamic system. And if you think in engineering terms, if there's a beam in this room that's faulty, An engineer can come in and figure out the load and the kind of beam you need to replace it with, and they can like get down to the weight and all that, and put a new beam in, and the ceiling will be fine. Because the ceiling's static, it's just material. But our cells are changing, we're constantly adapting, so anything that's applied to our system that's static, the body begins to adapt to, particularly in the sensory system. Medications, we'll talk about them a little more in a minute, but medications not only lead to pushing and crashing because that pill takes the edge off so you can do too much, but there's another part of the brain that actually amps up the pain signal and increases our sensory awareness of pain, plus all the other bad effects we talk about with the sedating medicines. So this foray into the medical community is often necessary, but you can see how over time this can worsen the process. The second and sometimes co-occurring problem is the world of alternative medicine. And I'm running out of space, but you'll get the. So when we talk about things like acupuncture, chiropractic, massage, diets, vitamins, Reiki, craniosacral therapy, neuromuscular re-education, and then we've got in the media the boys, Dr. Oz, Dr. Drew, Dr. Phil. We've got the internet. We've got Aunt Edna who calls up and says, you know, my friend has the same thing you have. Why don't you try rubbing your body with, you know, sea salt and then take a hot bath or something. Here's the allure of alternative medicine. It's ancient, it's natural, and it's mysterious. So let's try it. Well, just because something is ancient doesn't mean it's going to be very helpful, okay? I have ancient dirt in my yard. It doesn't help me feel better every day, okay? And the natural part is really a lie, isn't it? Because we talked about this week, marijuana is natural, alcohol is natural, cocaine is natural, opium is natural, tobacco is natural. They're still chemicals, aren't they? So whether they're made in a factory in Indiana or grown in your backyard or in a different country, doesn't make it any better for you. There are no diets for chronic pain. Your problem is not a dietary deficiency, okay? So cleansing and detoxifying and, you know, cleaning out your colon and all that stuff is unnecessary. Our colons are sewer pipes. They're just fine the way they are. You don't need to clean them, okay? But you get into this whole other world and you're so desperate to feel better that you begin to grasp at all these things. Massage, we talked about that a lot. One of my favorite targets because the logic of massage is this. You've got tight, sore muscles. So if I can mash on your tight, sore muscles and make them looser, maybe we can help you feel better. And then we add to that with the science of the toxins in your muscles being released. And so we mash on your sore, tight muscles for a half an hour. You go home feeling more sore, weaker, like a wet noodle, and you drink a lot of water to get the toxins out, so you go to the bathroom more, so you think the toxins are leaving your body, but they're just because you drank more water, you went to the bathroom more. And then you feel bad for a day, but it hurts so good that it must really be doing something, and then you have to go back next week. It's fool's game because every massage amps up the sensitivity, amps up the sensitization. All you're doing is mashing on muscles and making them hurt worse. There are much healthier ways to get your muscles loose, like stretches and exercise, okay? Chiropractor is another one. This whole adjustment business, like we'll get your floating rib back in place and come back next week and I'll adjust it again. Or we'll, you know, do this or that in your spine. As I said earlier this week, if your mechanic told you your car needs to come in every week and get an adjustment, what would you do? You either fire the mechanic or get a new car. Your body doesn't need an adjustment every week. It's simply a symptom trick where you temporarily feel better when they crack something or push on something, and then you have to go back the next week and have it done again. What does that do to your sense of control? You're completely turning over your symptom management to some guy that's making $50 a crack, literally, and you're not getting any benefit from it. Okay? So this is the physical aspects of the cycle pain. I just want to add a couple other things that happen. So along the way, we also know that confusion, depression, anxiety, stress can all set in. Because it's very confusing when you go in particularly if you're going through the medical system, one doctor will tell you they think you have this and we'll check on it again in 6 months. Another doctor will say we got to monitor this. And you're given all these diagnoses that may or may not be accurate, and you're pulled in 100 different directions, and the confusion appears even worse because it's all mysterious, remember. So then you get stressed out. You have an invisible problem to begin with, so your family begins to doubt you. Then you feel guilty because you can't work anymore. You're not doing stuff around the house. And then you get into the behavioral things of pushing and crashing and pain behaviors, or isolating is the last one. We talked about pushing and crashing this week. And for the family members and the new patients, I'm saying this with all sincerity and love, but we treat a bunch of type A perfectionistic control freaks, okay, who have hit the wall. And when you're a type A perfectionistic control freak, you often marry them. So those of you that are poking each other, yeah, you deserve your poke too, okay? And here's what happens. When you're a type A perfectionistic control freak, nobody can do it as good as you can do it. So when you're able to do it, you do too much, and then you crash. And when you can't do it, you're stressed out because nobody's doing it just like you would do it. And the minute you feel better, you go back and do it again. And your family sees it happening. In fact, your family, so often in evaluations, I love this part of the eval because I'll ask the patient, well, do you ever find times where you feel like you need to do more things and you do too much and then you crash? And they're like, no. And the other person's just like a bobblehead. They're like, yeah. See, I told you. Because family members see this coming a mile away. It's like that Thelma and Louise, the last scene of Thelma and Louise. We know they're going over the cliff. Okay, there's no doubt. And that's what you see your family member do all the time. Honey, why don't you not do 15 things today? Let's just do a couple. No, I don't know when I'll feel this good again. I got to get stuff done. And sure enough, right over the cliff. And then family members, you get frustrated because you saw it coming and you really want to say, I told you so. Okay, but they look so miserable you really don't dare because you're going to draw back a nub. So the pattern just continues. And then pain behaviors. We'll spend a lot of time on this on Monday, but pain behaviors are those things that we say, do, or think that reminds ourselves or others that we're in pain. So now family members, and we'll delve into this, but family members and patients start to get into this perverse communication style where the person will get up and be like, no, I'm okay. And the family members say, I can read it in their eyes. They're not doing well. They need to go lay down. And you get this whole secondary set of behaviors that lead to further dysfunction. And family members, you often fall into two categories, either pillow fluffers or bootstrappers, okay? The pillow fluffers are can I get you anything you need to lay down? You look tired. How about your pain pill? Should we call a doctor? Can I get you another pillow? Do you need your ice pack? Where's your brace? Et cetera, et cetera. And the bootstrappers are like, well, suck it up, buttercup. I was in the Marines, and you can do this too. You know, that's not helpful either, by the way. But then you get this relational difficulty because now you've got an invisible problem that's unmanageable. Everybody's frustrated. You've got all kinds of mixed messages coming from the world. What do you do about it? And you can see this cycle just can keep going around and around and around. So one of the things that we work on very directly is trying to break some of these aspects. We counsel you on stopping going to so many doctors. We counsel you and help you get off medications. We help you reduce pain behaviors. We help you break out of the pushing and crashing cycle. We help you physically restore your functioning so you can do more. This is really the target of pain rehab right here in a nutshell. So we'll come, for the newer folks, we'll come back and talk about this in a whole lecture, but I want to highlight that this is one of the things we talked about this week, okay? The last thing I want to cover is medications. And I don't have time or space to list all the ones we listed. But the top line here are the ones that we target universally for anybody coming into the program. We wean our patients off their opiates. We get them off their sleeping pills, their nerve pills, and their stimulants, okay? I'll come back and tell you why in a second. But we also attack muscle relaxers, anti-inflammatories, GI meds, sometimes antidepressants, sometimes membrane stabilizers. And here's why. The medication setup for our patients goes as follows. Opiates, benzodiazepines, and sleeping pills are sedating, mind-numbing, memory-erasing, depressing, constipating, slowing down compounds that do nothing to improve a person's overall physical functioning. In fact, they do the opposite. They become a form of escaping and avoiding. They lead to physical deconditioning, they lead to sleep disruption, they lead to depression, they lead to GI dysfunction, they lead to heart dysregulation. And what happens over time is the body habituates to the pain-relieving properties, so it takes more over time to get the same symptom relief, but there's still all those other sedating effects. Those first three medicines directly interfere with memory, concentration, mood, so the more a person takes them, the more impaired they get. And if you put that in the context of this cycle of pain, social functioning, daily functioning, consistency all get impaired. You are less able to have command over your environment, and the brain continues to want more and more of it. Now, I've said to the patients during this lecture, we are not an addiction program. We do not treat you like addicts. We don't have any 12-step program. But what we do know is that these medicines are reinforcing for your brain. So whether anyone's ever gotten high off of them or ever gotten a buzz off of them, it's irrelevant. It's still affecting their physiology. And there's even more long-term consequences. We now know that chronic opiate use in men can permanently suppress testosterone. And it doesn't rebound after it comes off necessarily. So it's a great concern. And what happened historically is, the reason this became such a prevalent problem is that in the 60s and 70s, and probably into the early 80s, there was very likely undertreatment of some kinds of pain, okay? There was a caution about giving pain medicine. And then palliative care, the hospice movement came into being and really gained control. And they showed us that our fear of these medicines was overwrought in terms of people that are dying. So they demonstrated time and time again, if you're dying of cancer or some painful disease, you deserve to have a good, peaceful death. And it's a very noble cause, and to medicate people to keep them comfortable in their last days is very, very important. Nothing against that. But what some of those people in that particular field did is they overreached and started to say, well, if we can do this for dying people, why can't we do this for people with chronic pain? Because people with chronic pain deserve pain relief as well. And they came at the chronic pain population and said, you know what, we have chemicals that can reduce your symptoms. And they were very aggressive in the late 90s and early 2000s, and that's when we saw this proliferation of many, many different forms of getting these drugs into your bodies. Patches, plastic sticks embedded with opiates, and dissolvable things you could put under your tongue, and intrathecal into the spine, and all these long-acting and short-acting, and syrups, and this and that came into. And what happened is they entered through the FDA and through the medical system on the cancer side. Like fentanyl patches. You guys have heard of fentanyl patches. Fentanyl patches were designed for people with cancer that couldn't take medicine orally and help them have pain relief. Well, all of a sudden the doctor said, well, you know, it works for my cancer patient. Maybe that person with fibromyalgia would benefit from it. And so then we started seeing patients with fibromyalgia on fentanyl. And at doses that were like heroic, that would drop an elephant. And what we found happened is that no matter how much pain medicine we threw at the problem, or a doctor would throw at the problem, the level of pain wouldn't necessarily go down. What would go down is functioning. In fact, the palliative care crowd in the early 2000s published a study where they took 3 groups of back pain patients, and divided them into 3 groups. One group, they gave them as much medicine as they needed to be comfortable with a ceiling. I mean, it wasn't unlimited. The next group, they gave a fixed amount of pain medicine. And the third group, they gave no pain medicine. And they evaluated them after 6 weeks. And what they found was that the group that got the most pain medicine had the highest level of pain relief. The group that got a moderate amount of pain medicine had a moderate amount of pain relief. And the group that got no pain medicine had less pain relief. But what was important to our field in rehab is the functionality of the 3 groups was exactly the same. They were all like couch potatoes. So even if they were comfortable, they weren't functioning. And so when we talk with patients about whether they want to come in the program or not, one of the questions that I ask is, are you happy being inactive? And almost universally, the answer is no. I want to get my activity level back. I want my functioning back, because that's an important part of life. So what we really are fighting against, in many ways, it's getting better now, but what we fought against is this concept of comfort over function. And again, I have no beef with that. If you're dying of something, please be comfortable. Have a good death. But if you're going to live another 10, 20, 30 years, do you want to be in behavioral hospice the rest of your life? Living like you're dying? I mean, that's essentially what happens. We find the same thing happens with the benzodiazepines and the sleepers. And then the fourth area I just want to talk about briefly is the stimulants, the Adderalls, Provigils, Nuvigils, and all of them. Because chemically, they're very closely related to cocaine. And there are very few people, adults, who need stimulants for ADHD. Adult ADHD is very infrequent in the population. It's way overdiagnosed. And now what happens is, I'll give you the setup real quickly, is you go to the doctor on your first pass, maybe this part of the cycle, and they'll give you a low level of an opiate, and they'll give you probably a muscle relaxer and an anti-inflammatory just to cover their bases. And that might hold you for a while. And then you go back to the doctor and it's not working and you're starting to slip over to this side of the cycle, and they'll be like, okay, let's give you a long and short-acting pain medicine. Now you're not sleeping very well, so we're going to put you on a sleeping pill. Now we think you might be a little bit depressed, so we're going to give you an antidepressant, plus it may help your pain. And then, because you have a hard time staying awake during the day, we're going to give you a stimulant, okay? Now, I know that's all really hard on your stomach, so we'll give you some Prilosec and Zofran, and, I know you're constipated, so we'll give you a laxative, okay? And so before you know it, you're on 10 or 15 things, and it's chemical soup. And I know there are people old enough in the room to remember the Jefferson Airplane song, Go Ask Alice, okay? One pill makes you smaller, one pill makes you tall, one pill doesn't do anything at all. You get into this pattern of go up, go down, go up, go down, and then loosen the bowels, tighten up the bowels. Don't puke, puke. It just gets to be this mess, and you just get into this vicious cycle. And what do doctors mostly do is they don't usually take away, they usually add. And then you get into polypharmacy. And then just about the time your body's getting a little used to that, somebody comes over and says, well, you need these supplements too, okay? We don't know what are in the supplements, but we know you need them. Just a side note, because I don't know if I'll have an opportunity to say this before. Not too long ago, a chemical company in Canada bought over-the-counter supplements from different stores, and they had analyzed what was actually in the supplements. And do you know that in the majority of samples, there was very little active ingredient, but they were filled with sawdust, drywall dust, peanut shells, stuff that didn't do anything or could hurt you, I suppose. But they had very little active ingredient. None of that is regulated. But it's a common ruse out there. So we are obviously very conservative with these medications, and that's one of the reasons we go after the ones we go after. We've also shown in studies that it's very possible to come off even high doses of these things in the 3 weeks and still do very well. I'm going to close with this study, and then we'll take some questions. So about 10 years ago now, we took 400 consecutive patients admitted to the program in Rochester and statistically divided them between people that came in on pain medicines and those that came in on no pain medicines. The only difference between the two groups on all of the data we collected was that the pain medicine group had higher baseline pain scores at the beginning of the program. Both groups showed significant improvement with reduced pain, improved functioning, improved sleep, improved mood throughout the program, even the group that was coming off the strong medicines. The only difference at the end of the program was that the pain medicine group, now detoxified, now off their medicines, had slightly higher anxiety scores. But other than that, they looked identical. And it's our strong belief, and our data will support this, that the only way to get off these medicines is to do it in a program like this. Because if you sit at home and try to get off of them, you become a clock watcher. I'll get to take my next half tab in 20 minutes, and it becomes almost an obsession. And then invariably you'll get to some level where you can't tolerate reducing anymore, and you'll call the doctor, and the doctor will say, well, let's hold there for a while. And then you never move from there, I'll tell you. This is a way to get off of this stuff and learn other techniques to improve yourself. So the take-home points today are cycle of pain and the implications of that, the medication rationale, and at least a beginning understanding of central sensitization. Okay? So I'll take questions now. Anybody have any questions about this? Sir?
I think I know the answer to the question before I even ask it, but why do doctors even engage in this activity?
For a couple specific reasons. It works sometimes. And in the front end, in fact, you guys may know my office and my practice is in the Department of Pain Medicine here. So my colleagues are all interventional pain doctors. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, why do doctors start this process in the first place? Thank you. And the answer is, on the front end, nobody, the doctor, the patient, the family, nobody can tell that this is becoming chronic. So back here, let's try it. Let's see if this helps us. And for some people it does, and that's the end of the story. There are patients on the 5th floor this morning getting an injection that they get an injection every 6 months and they're good to go. So we don't ever have a distinctive marker when this becomes chronic. And it's sort of like, by the time it's happened, it's too late to do anything about it, but it's kind of that slow march into the pathway. And that's why we tell our patients, you know what, we don't do this to shame you. We don't show you these things to make you feel guilty because you didn't know any better at the time. Your family didn't know any better. Your doctors were trying to help you. It was an earnest effort to get the process better. But looking backward, we want you to learn the next time not to fall into this slippery place. But at the front end, a lot of it works. In fact, the other thing we'll talk about sensitization is no one can ever say when did their pain become chronic. Almost everyone can say when it got worse or when it started, but we don't know when your pain became chronic. And that's another part of this problem. We're still treating a process that sometimes gets better. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
I think I can add to that. In the beginning, everything that you're saying is true. And then you get to a doctor who sees that you've been on pain medications and you've tried multiple, and they know that you came to them for help. So if they were to say, I suggest you get off all of this, you're never going back to them.
That's right.
It's not going to be popular.
That's right.
And then they basically say, okay, well, you haven't tried this. Let's try this. They want to try to help you. They're not as educated in all of this. So, because some doctors do know it's been a chronic problem. When you say, I've been in this pain for 15 years, and I've done 30 of these things, and I've tried all this, well, okay, you haven't tried these two, let's do it.
That's right. And so the statement was the chronic use of medications becomes almost habitual on the medical provider's part, and the new doctor's not going to really undo what the other doctors have done. I'll tell you a couple quick stories to reinforce that. Several years ago, I had a fibromyalgia patient that was on 300 micrograms of fentanyl a day. I mean, that's like end of life levels. So I called her doctor in another state, and I said, we want her in the pain rehab program, but can you help taper a little bit before we get here? And he said to me on the phone, oh, I don't stop these medicines, I just start them. Now, I'm a quick-witted fellow, and I said, you use brakes on your car? And he hung up on me. But it's like there are some people that are so focused on the medicines being the answer. The other thing is, and it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek statement, but a lot of doctors act like pain is an opiate deficiency. If we can just get your level of opiates up high enough, you'll be fine. And there's a great seduction in that, and then it kind of gets to be this inexorable march, absolutely.
What happens to the Hippocratic Oath?
Well,
They get thrown out the window or what?
no, doctors still, I think, for the most part, still genuinely think they're helping. I don't think it's out of malfeasance. I think it's more out of their tools, what they know, what they've been taught, what they believe. And we're just a different way of looking at it. And in fact, that's one of the hard things about this program is that we're about 180 degrees in the opposite direction. But when I speak to physician groups, and I use some of these same examples, some of the same, I don't mince any words, they're in agreement. In fact, every year we have the opportunity to talk to non-pain physicians. We have a big seminar Mayo puts on. And they'll just flood the podium with questions like, you've hit the nail on the head, but I don't know what else to do. Because here's the other behavioral setup. You come in pain to the doctor, you and he are in the office together, you're grimacing and irritated and upset, and what's the simplest thing for me to do? Okay? And I temporarily feel a little bit better. You feel like at least I'm trying. And so there's a whole lot of behavioral aspects that get set up in there too. And part of it's on the patient too, because patients have learned that if they show enough distress, they'll get somebody to give them something. So it's very complex, and that's why we try to deal with it at all these levels. All right, let me stop here. One thing that I always want to do on Fridays is go back to this model that we call central sensitization, okay? The video talked about the nervous system and the pain and the impulses and so forth. The term that we use in our field is called central sensitization, and it basically entails a look at the interface between our peripheral nervous system and our central nervous system. It's always a bit intimidating to follow the video because my artistic skills are just a beat off. This is supposed to be the brain and the spinal cord, okay? If you thought anything else, keep it to yourself. Generally what happens, what's discussed in the video, is this combination between input from the peripheral nervous system and then sensitization in the somatosensory cortex, a part of our brain that receives sensory information. And this bears so much reviewing because this concept really unifies a lot of what our patients have gone through and have experienced in terms of their chronic pain. Many folks, over the course of dealing with their chronic pain, have been led to believe that their pain may not be real, it may be psychosomatic, there may be something else going on, and or the opposite is often true. No stone is left unturned clinically, and you may even be told you have very bad things that we're just going to watch. So you can experience a very wide swing in terms of opinions about this. But one thing that's important to know, and we will amplify this next week, is that this can happen from disease, illness, injury, surgery. Any combination of factors can up-regulate the peripheral nervous system input. So once this peripheral nervous system has increased the strength of its signal, okay, and the way this happens very quickly is the neurons in our body, and we have neurons in every square inch of our body that perceive sensations on a continuous basis. The perception may be of vibration, of movement, of temperature, of pain of one sort or another. In our digestive system, we have a general awareness of the state of our digestion. Those inputs are constantly streaming from the body to the brain, and in most cases, just pass through just sort of as a radar sweep, just kind of watching the environment, making sure everything's okay. But when one or more of these causes upregulates the strength of a particular input, and it's repeated frequently, either by deterioration in the body, injury, all these other factors, once that input is increased, it has a stronger and stronger pathway to the brain, and now the brain responds with increased sensitivity, okay? Now I say the word sensitivity, and I feel like every week I need to clarify, I don't think our patients are particularly sensitive, Okay, in fact, some of them are downright rude at times. So it's not like we have a bunch of sensitive people that can't take it. Okay? When I say sensitivity, I literally mean the neurons have become more sensitive, more reactive to every input. The analogy that we use is that of a smoke detector. If a normal smoke detector will go off when you burn the eggs in the kitchen, now imagine having a smoke detector that goes off when you light a candle 3 bedrooms away, and it goes off at 100 decibels. That's the difference in sensitivity. You'd say that second smoke detector is more sensitive than the first. That's what we're talking about. The additional difficulty is the receptive neurons in the brain don't just detect pain, they detect all our sensations. So over time, things like pain and fatigue are often some of the first symptoms, but now sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, temperature, movement also have inputs that can become uncomfortable, can become part of the noxious set of stimuli. So often our patients will say, you know, over time, I've become more sensitive to certain foods. Temperatures bother me. I can feel the weather change. I don't like to move certain ways. I don't like to lay certain ways. And so your sensitivity increases not because of any new process. It's simply because this pathway has become repeatedly overstimulated. Okay? So that, in a nutshell, that's our approach to central sensitization. And each week we talk about one of 3 core areas that this impacts. So once this process starts, and I want to reiterate for the newer folks, our patients had no control over this process starting. Okay? There's no unique personality type. This isn't neuroses. This is not depression. This is not some sort of mental weakness. Any person walking the planet has the potential to develop this syndrome. Okay? Given the right circumstances, given the right amount of medical things or other circumstances with stress and environmental factors, this can trip off. Okay? So if you don't have this, it doesn't mean that you're any different than the folks that do. And in fact, in a very loving way, we tell our patients that they're special, but they're not unique. Okay? Because this literally could happen to anybody. It's just happened to a set of people that are here to deal with it. So the 3 things, or the main areas that we look at, can include, after the fact, emotional distress, behavior, and chemicals. So this week, one of the main topics of the week is a topic that we call pain behaviors. Pain behaviors are those things we say, do, or think that reminds ourselves or others that we are in pain. So we list in thorough detail a whole series of pain behaviors. I'm going to relist many of them this morning just for illustration. So if we walked out in the lobby of the Mayo Clinic and we said this definition, pain behaviors are anything that a person says, does, or thinks that reminds themselves or others that they're in pain, what kind of things do you think the average person in the public would come up with? Okay. Talking, moaning, groaning. Yeah, a lot of times we see people that are rubbing or holding, limping, guarding a particular area. Posture can tell us that. Shifting, from one leg to another or in your seat. So it would be pretty easy to detect those pain behaviors, and we've all actually engaged in some of these, haven't we? Okay, they're sort of natural responses to the sensations. All right? But we have an additional list of things like braces, canes, walkers, ice, heat, cushions, patches, ointments and creams. Additional things that have maybe been recommended at one time or another. Why don't you try this? Why don't you use this cream? Or here's a cane, maybe that'll help you walk better. Or try this brace for a while. Those kind of things. But in a chronic situation, okay, and we're talking about really a problem of sensation now and not any mechanical destruction, most of our patients don't need those aids on an ongoing basis. Some of our folks do. Some patients come in and they need a walker and they stay on a walker because they have other medical issues. But a lot of folks have been given braces and walkers and other aids by a previous practitioner to see if it doesn't help. Well, intuitively, even if you don't have a medical background, if you wear a brace for a long time, what do you think is going to happen to the underlying muscle strength in that part of the body? It's going to go down, isn't it? If I constantly have something on my neck to help my neck hold up and then I take that something off, my muscles aren't going to be as strong. If I'm using other braces that aren't necessary for strength or for support, it's going to weaken me. Plus, all these things call attention to my condition, don't they? So we have reminders, we have personal reminders, and if we just stopped here, because this is a big question for a lot of folks in the program, all the physical things. So if I'm rubbing where it hurts, or I'm limping, or I'm holding and guarding, or I'm talking about it, I am literally stimulating the neural connections of my sensory cortex. Quick example. The folks in the program heard me say this week. There have been studies with back pain patients and functional MRI machines. So you take a person, you put them in a functional MRI, and you can map out their brain activity in real time. It's really cool technology. So they took these back pain patients and they put them in an MRI machine on a bad pain day, a day where they said it was 8 to 10 out of 10. And they mapped out where their pain centers were. And they're pretty consistent areas, expected areas. Then they took those same patients, so they served as their own control. They took those same patients on a low pain day, put them in the MRI, and they had one instruction. Think about your back pain. You know what happened? The brain lit up just as much as it did on a bad pain day. Now, some people will be like, so then you're saying it's in my head. Yes, it's in your head. But it's not in your head like an imaginary thing. It's in your head because it's a sensory memory. And before you get a little bit too defensive about this, if you think about one of your favorite desserts long enough, or you think about a scent that you like very much, or a place that you've been, you can almost feel like you're there, can't you? It's not abnormal to have a sensory memory. It's just that for a lot of our patients, the sensory memory are of unpleasant sensations. And so the more they physically or verbally rehearse those sensations, the more they're going to be in their active awareness. The more attention you call to an area, the more you're going to be aware of that area. Just like with bracing and cushions, our patients don't need ice and heat anymore. Okay? Ice is really only necessary if there's an inflammatory condition and in the first few hours or days after an injury. But 3 years later, all it does is numb the area, and it reminds your brain that you got a problem there. Okay? Some other ones. Physical and occupational therapy. Injections. Medications. Furniture. Pets. Clothing. Hairstyles. Dr. Oz. Dr. Drew. Dr. Phil. Call those the O boys. the internet, research, Aunt Edna, pizza, pineapple, potatoes, massage, acupuncture, Reiki, vitamins, diets. What am I missing, gang?
Tens,
That's right, TENS units.
self-limiting.
Oh yeah, how could I forget chiropractor? These are a few of my favorite things. Self-limiting, war stories, organ recitals, support groups, scanning. So a lot of folks would be like, okay, I was with you on the first couple of columns. I'm a little ticked off about it, but now this is getting personal, okay? What's with the rest of this list? Why do we list all these other things? Okay, there's some individual aspects to this. Why are these on the list, though? What's the big deal? Yeah, you go back to, it reminds myself or others that I'm in pain. And many of these things inadvertently amplify the sensitization cycle, because what they do is they focus on your symptoms. Think about massage for a second, okay? Massage is one of our big, it's a personal thing for me. I just kind of grind when people talk about therapeutic massage, okay? If you want to get a day spa thing and you get a mani-pedi and you have some hot stones put on your back and you smell sandalwood incense, that's great, you know, do whatever, it's a free country. But massage for chronic pain is like a really dumb thing, because you mash on sore muscles to release imaginary toxins, you leave in more pain, and you're told to drink a lot of water to get the toxins out of your body. So you go home feeling like a wet, sore noodle, and you're going to the bathroom a lot, so you think something must have happened. And then you finally feel a little bit better, and then maybe for a day or two you feel a little looser, and then you go right back, and Helga with the big elbow starts mashing on you again. Okay? All you're doing is you're mashing on sore muscles, increasing the sensory input to an already oversensitized brain. Dumb. There are no toxins. Okay? And those little knots that she worked out are going to come right back because you got tense muscles, and they're not in very good shape. You can't relax or massage your way to health, okay? If you want to do it for a little treat later on down the road because you're such an awesome person and you deserve it, that's fine. But it's not therapeutic. Acupuncture. I helped participate in a study in Rochester that showed that acupuncture reduces fibromyalgia symptoms. What's the problem? You have to keep repeating it. So whenever you go back to the acupuncturist, what do they ask you? How's your pain? Where does it hurt? Let's do these meridians today. It's all focused on your pain. So you go in there, you're reminded. Pain clinics. We ask our patients after the program not to go back to pain clinics. What do pain clinics do? They ask you about your pain. And in fact, our pain clinic, which is really awesome, has at the bottom of the first page a mannequin like a human body, and you make your own pain cartoon. Sharp shooting here, dull aching there, and we've gotten some doozies over the years, you know, people that are annotated and do in different colors. And by the time you walk through the pain clinic door, all of your thoughts are on your pain. So what you've done, again, you focused on your sensitization. TENS units and PT and OT, I call them out because on an outpatient basis, physical therapy in particular, can make this whole process worse. So many of our patients rightly say, I'm not doing physical therapy. It made my problem worse. Yeah, because physical therapy on an outpatient basis is awesome if you have one area to work on. You hurt your shoulder, playing tennis or something, and they can get it stronger again. Or you had a total knee replacement, and they can get you moving again. That's awesome. But if you hurt in a lot of places, or you're sensitized, and you go to an outpatient physical therapist, they amp up your symptoms, then they often focus on symptoms, and then you go home and you're feeling worse, so you don't do anything for a couple days, and it's time for PT again. So it's also pushing and crashing. And then you leave physical therapy feeling worse because they focus just on one part and you hurt all over. So it's not a helpful thing for chronic pain. Is it helpful for a lot of people? Absolutely. It's really a good set of strategies. I call it occupational therapy. We have a running joke because pretty much if you're really a stickler and really rigid and you're one of those kind of bean counter know-it-alls, you're going to say, well, everything we hear in occupational therapy is actually a pain behavior. Because Laura and Elke and Suzanne tell me I need to modify my activities. Well, modifying my activities is a pain behavior, isn't it, doctor? Mm-hmm. Well, why are you modifying your activities? If you really look at it, it's modifying to do more, isn't it? They give you ideas about doing things a different way. If I didn't have pain, I wouldn't have to do it that way. You're right. But you got pain and you got to do it that way. Time management, moderation. So the reason I bring those out is I'm actually trying to undercut your arguments because there will be people that will say, well, that's a pain behavior. Fine. Here's the main point. What's it doing to your sensitization is really the question. What's it doing to your functioning? What's it telling people in your environment? Okay? Family members. We'll get to you next hour, but I'll give you a little preview if you're brave enough to come. You guys are part of the problem sometimes. How do you feel? You look tired. Maybe you need to go lay down and take a rest. I'll get your pain pill and your pillow and your ice pack. I'll be right back. Or some of you are like, and family members are notorious for this, well, even if I don't ask, I can see it in their eyes. Stop looking in their eyes, okay? Look somewhere else. Because all those attempts to help a person trace their symptoms back just makes them think about it. And folks in the program, I think if you're honest and you sit back, you'll even start to feel like when people talk about this, even this lecture gets a little uncomfortable because it makes you think more about your symptoms, okay? There is no pain diet, sorry to say. Okay, some people have dietary restrictions, but you don't need your colon cleansed. You don't need a detox diet. You don't need to eat just fruit or just this or just that. There's no vitamin deficiency that causes pain, okay? So all the kooky diet books out there, all the self-help stuff, just get rid of it. And the internet and the media are the worst, okay? I don't know if any of you heard about a month or so ago, a couple months ago now maybe, Dr. Oz was called on the floor of the U.S. Senate, okay, and he was challenged about the claims he was making about certain diets on his show. I think it was the green tea extract diet or something. And he said in live testimony, well, I don't even believe some of the stuff I say anyway. Dr. Oz, say it is not so. He's just a shill for the media, okay? It's a show. He puts up this giant, I'll have to confess, I've watched parts of 2 shows. One of them he put up this like huge model of the colon, okay? And in the middle of the model, he's got like green like fluid in there to show how toxic your colon is. Your colon is a sewer pipe, okay? It's meant to be that way. It's a manufacturing plant for garbage. It's okay. It's going to be dirty. I mean, do you care if your garbage truck is spotless when it comes down the street? No. You expect it to have a little dings on it. Well, that's your colon. So then he shows how flushing it out, how beautiful that is. So he runs a garden hose through this model, and then clear water's coming through, and you're like, oh, yes, I can feel the detoxification. You don't need it, okay? The other one that really cracked me up, I was on a trip one time and a little bit bored, so I saw a repeat of a Dr. Oz show. They had a health dream analyzer, okay? So this lady would like analyze your dreams related to your health. So she said something about if you have if you have dreams of like cutting or chopping, you're concerned about your dental health. And you need to go see the dentist. Okay. I mean, this gets nuts, but all is focusing on your symptoms. The internet. Stop researching. Get off the Mayo website, the Harvard website, the Johns Hopkins website, the Stanford website, because every time you do a search for a symptom, what comes up? It's always the 3 worst things. Headache, it's usually aneurysm, stroke, or some kind of tumor. It's never stress, okay? It's never you drank too much last night. You type in fatigue, it's myeloma, all the omas, leukemia, all the bad blood cancers. It's not that you have bad sleep hygiene and you're out of shape, okay? So then you scare the pants off yourself, and then you read on. Then you go to your doctor, you say, you sure I don't have that? Well, we'll check it out just in case. And then you go through a whole other range of tests. Research is really, really ill-advised in the situation that you guys are in. I don't want you to be not knowledgeable, but you're not really have the full scope of information to do good research. Aunt Edna, I just put Aunt Edna up there, God bless her. Your relatives. You have that relative that calls and said, I know you have fibromyalgia and back pain. I was just talking to a friend, and then she comes up with something that she discovered about back pain and fibromyalgia, okay? Politely just say to Aunt Edna, I'm doing really well, thanks for the phone call. Oh, how's your rose garden? And then just hang up on her, okay? I mean, politely hang up because you don't want to be taken out of the will. War stories, scanning, talking about it, it's so hard to break this pattern, and we see it every week in our group. We see patients that start chatting with one another, and they start comparing notes. Well, I tried that diet. Did it make you feel better? Yeah, I felt better for a while. You should cut out all the raisins and eat more fresh fruit. And then it gets to be symptom talk. We encourage our folks not to talk about their sleep, their mood, their digestive health, as well as their pain. Because it's all pain behavior, ultimately. Because you ask somebody, how's your mood today? It's 1/4 step away from how are you feeling, okay? So it's super important to be strict with all these factors. Last couple, and then I've got one more thing I want to talk about this morning. Pizza, pineapple, and potatoes. Takeout is fine. I put pizza up there just as an example of takeout. However, if you're doing takeout on a continuous basis, or every time you do takeout it's a sign that you're not having a good day, that can be a pain behavior, can't it? Oh, Dad's getting pizza again, he must not be feeling good. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. Pineapple, classic pain behavior at multiple levels. We had a patient a couple years ago confessed to eating a pineapple every day because she had heard on Dr. Oz that it had anti-inflammatory properties. So she'd have her husband bring home a pineapple, which is a pain behavior because he's pillow fluffing her. She'd eat a pineapple every day, which is a pain behavior because it's a thing. And she hated pineapple. So it's kind of stupid too. Last one, potatoes. Kind of an all-time favorite. Patient several years ago up in Rochester had bad headaches. And this person would travel everywhere she went with a 10-pound sack of potatoes. She'd lay down at night, put the potatoes on her head in a certain organizational pattern to put pressure spots on her head so it wouldn't hurt as much. So we did a potato taper. We had her bring in a potato every day, and then we made potato salad, okay? Which is a diet, but it's a good diet because it was kind of this nice German potato salad with a little vinegar, and it was delicious. But the point is, people get to some goofy levels to try to manage their pain, and ultimately, it feeds back and makes sensitization worse, okay? That's pain behaviors. Yes, it's provocative. Yes, I want you to be a little bit stirred up about it because I want you to look in your own life. Furniture, clothing, hairstyles. Is there a chair at home that is the pain chair? Do you always lay on that sofa with that special blankie and have Fido jump up and keep you warm when you're having a bad pain day? That's a pain behavior on 3 levels, isn't it? Okay? Your clothing. Some folks adapt very loose clothing because tight clothing hurts. Or some people wear very constrictive clothing so it keeps their swelling down. We had a lady one time that was Spanxed from, head to toe. So it can come out in many different ways. I didn't put it up there, but relaxation, breathing, meditation, stuff we even teach can become a pain behavior if you don't use it at the right time and in the right manner. So take-home message is this. If you have a question about what you're doing, even if it's something we recommend, you have to ask yourself 2 things. Why am I doing it? And when am I doing it? The why is, if I'm doing this as part of a regimen to change my behavioral approach to chronic pain, if I'm doing it as a way to function better on a more consistent basis, then it's probably not a pain behavior. But if I'm doing it in response to symptoms or an effort to reduce symptoms directly, it's probably a pain behavior. The when ties into the why. Am I doing it on a schedule? So if you do relaxation every day on a schedule, it's much less likely to be a pain behavior. But if you do relaxation every time you feel bad, or you stop in the middle where you're doing and you have to do some stretches to feel better, probably a pain behavior. So why am I doing it and when am I doing it? So just to review this board, some things are always off limits. We want you to avoid them forever and ever. Some of these are negotiable, but you have to answer the why and the when question. Okay? Last thing I think it's important to talk about, and we mentioned it some this week, is sleep. We don't ask our patients in the program what their sleep problems are because we pretty much would get a very common answer. A lot of folks have trouble getting to sleep or staying to sleep. It's pretty much those two things. And the reasons often are pain, stress, chemicals, environment, habit. And so over time, sleep gets consistently disrupted. So I'm going to try to put this in a small area, but we talk about sleep as occurring in cycles with 5 stages. And these cycles last about 90 to 120 minutes. And one of the common problems with folks in the pain rehab program is that their sleep tends to be light and then dreaming. Light and then dreaming. And they miss out on stage 3 and 4 sleep, which is really the deep sleep that we need. When you've gotten good stage 3, 4 sleep, that's when you feel rested. That's when you feel restored. That's when you feel refreshed. Because in stage 3, 4 sleep, you're getting muscle rest, brain rest, body cleansing. It's all the stuff that helps us kind of restore our muscles. Without that on a chronic basis, we feel more tired, we feel more physically less able to do things. But a lot of things keep people in that 1-2 REM sleep pattern, including the medicines that are meant to help you sleep. So let's start with medicines and chemicals. Pain pills, sleeping pills, nerve pills, and alcohol all keep sleep at a very light level. Now it's paradoxical for a lot of people because they'll say, well, it makes me drowsy. It helps me get to sleep. You're right. But if we were measuring your brain waves, they would stay in a very light level of sleep because they're putting you to sleep, but they're not letting your brain go through all the necessary stages of deep sleep. Okay? Pain. A lot of folks say, well, when I lay down at night, my pain is worse. Or I'll wake up and I'll hurt. Well, yes, those are 2 major factors that disrupt sleep, but what do we do to deal with that? Physical fitness and moderation. The more fit a body is, the better it's able to tolerate laying down. I know it sounds weird, I'm getting fit so I can lay down. But if you're not fit, if you're weak, you have poor posture, you have poor muscle tone when you lay down, you're going to get sore more quickly. Plus, without moderation, moderation is that balancing of activity and rest. A lot of folks have run 100 miles an hour all day. When they stop and try to lay down to sleep, their pain catches up to them. Because all day long they've been doing things to distract themselves from pain, and then when they lay down, there's no more distractions. Stress and emotional distress. If you're anxious and stressed out and you lay down at night and the whole world is quiet, even the goldfish is sleeping, it's the wild, wild west up here. Why did she say that? I got to do that tomorrow. Dang it, I forgot to do that today. I'm never going to make it through the rest of this week, and oh my gosh, my feet are killing me, and I have to go to the bathroom, and why is she snoring so loud? And it just goes on and on and on, and there's no barriers. Okay? Lastly is environment. Our bedrooms have become too much of multi-purpose rooms. And you've probably heard in other media outlets, the bedroom needs to be a quiet sanctuary, dark, cool, minimal stimulation for 2 things that start with S. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. But what happens is, folks don't feel well during the day, so they go take a nap in their bedroom during the day. They do other things in the bedroom, and it becomes a confusing environment for them. So we come up with a few simple sleep rules. Same bed, same wake time, number one. Number two, no naps over 20 to 30 minutes. Number three, no electronics in the bedroom. Number four, wind down. Number five, read a novel in bed. Some of the reasons that are important for this. If we don't keep the same bed wake time, within a day or two we can completely set our sleep clock. There have been studies that show that even for young, healthy, very active people, if they go out late Friday and Saturday night, it takes them really till the next Wednesday to recover physically and mentally. And most of us don't fit into that category. So it'll take us even longer. So a lot of folks will get up all diligently all during the week and then want to sleep in on the weekend. You do that and you're robbing the next night's sleep, and by Monday you're going to feel awful. No naps over 20 or 30 minutes, because if you take a nap over 20 or 30 minutes, you're robbing a sleep cycle from tonight. You're not paying back last night. No electronics in the bedroom. Physically, even if your eyes are closed, the television still stimulates your visual cortex, still stimulates your auditory cortex, and television is just not that distracting to make you feel any better about yourself. So you can lay there, still think about all the awful things in your life, be stimulated, and not sleep. So we ask people to get the television out of the bedroom. Second, related to that, iPads, computers, smartphones, okay? Maybe not as physically stimulating, but certainly mentally, okay? Neither you, nor your family, nor your friends are that important that you need to know that they were having an awesome time at 1 o'clock in the morning, okay? You don't need the, hey, we're at a party, what are you doing? You know, who cares? I can find out about your stupid party tomorrow morning. And Facebook, okay? I can look at all your awesome Facebook postings tomorrow. They'll still just be there, right? And I don't need the latest baseball score from Taipei, and I don't need the weather report for, California. Just disconnect. And if you have to have your electronic device in your room because it's your alarm clock, turn off everything else. Don't check Facebook just one more time or this or that. Just disconnect. Because mentally it's such an important transition time. Lastly, reading in bed. Very simple instruction. If you cannot sleep or stay asleep, get a novel, either audio, not like an audio download, or I like a physical novel. We used to have these things called books. They had paper and they had print on the page. Try it. Read a novel until you're sleeping. And some people will say, well, I could read all night. Wonderful. You're getting 60% of the rest you need, and your brain will catch up when you fall asleep. If you lay there and do relaxation or breathing or meditation or try to sleep or listen to music, you're getting about 0 rest, okay? And stay in bed until you fall asleep. I know there's some sleep manuals, there's some sleep folks that say, if you can't sleep, get up and go to the other room until you get sleepy and then go back to bed, okay? They're really, really smart people, but they're terrible behaviorists, okay? Because here's the issue. I can't sleep in my bed, so I get up and go to the den. I get sleepy in the den, and I think, oh my gosh, I got to get to bed. What do I have to do to get back to bed? I have to wake up, I have to move, I'm probably going to go to the bathroom and get a drink on the way and let the cat out and check my Facebook just one more time to see how awesome I am. And by the time I get to bed, I'm going to be awake. You're so much better, just do it right there so that if you fall asleep, you fall asleep and you don't have to move. Same thing if you wake up in the middle of the night. Go back to sleep by reading a book in bed. And even if it's for a long time, you're still getting rest. Okay? So 3 of many points that we made this week. Pain behaviors, sleep hygiene. We talked about communication. But we really want you guys to begin to understand and internalize this model, because this really pivots on all the things we try to cover in our program. So any questions about this? Families, we'll get to questions in a little bit, but if any questions right now that come up out of this? Yes, sir.
Pain behavior is things that we
Mm-hmm.
I find it harder to think thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to control what I say, what I do. I can control what you think.
It's something that will,
Not think about pain when you're in pain.
right. It's something that will take more of an indirect approach. Because if I tell you not to think about something, what are you going to think about? The thing I just said don't think about, right? Try this out. Don't think about pink elephants for the next 10 seconds. Don't think about them. You can't. But over time, as you think about other things and you focus on the things you can do, your pain will become less in your awareness. That's a more passive thing than not. But you can also practice not rehearsing it. So if you notice a pain symptom, really work on not rehearsing why you have it, how bad it is it an 8 to 10 out of 10, is it sharpshooting? And by not talking about it, it also helps not rehearse it. That's what we're really talking about. And scanning and talking about it are the two ways that you can begin to get control over it. So turn off the radar as best you can.
What was that last?
Scanning and talking about it. Okay.